If you wander down the refrigerated aisle of an upscale Western grocery store today, you'll likely find tempeh. It sits right next to the premium plant-based superfoods, packaged in slick, vacuum-sealed plastic. It has become a highly lucrative cornerstone of the modern vegetarian diet. Production is now backed by massive corporate giants, some of which proudly operate entirely carbon-neutral supply chains to churn out thousands of pounds of the stuff every single week. But travel back to mid-20th century Indonesia, and the perception is entirely different. Indonesia's first president, Sukarno, famously warned his citizens, "Jangan menjadi bangsa tempeh," do not become a tempeh nation. In Javanese society, mental tempeh was an active slur. If someone labeled you with it, they were calling you weak, cheap, and low class. Unlike tofu or soy sauce, which were brought in through trade from China and Japan, tempeh is an indigenous 18th century invention of the Nusantara archipelago. For generations, it was exclusively the food of the rural poor. How did a hyper-local staple, when used as an insult by its own head of state, secretly engineer a culture's survival and eventually conquer the global health food market? The answer starts in an 18th century central Javanese agrarian household. There is an old Javanese proverb, "Yen atine becik, tempeh apik." It means that if your heart is good, your tempeh will be good. The belief was that only people with a harmonious household could successfully make it. Making it required total cooperation. The men of the household would execute the boiling and peeling of the yellow soybeans. Then the women took over the process, carefully mixing in the traditional yeast and wrapping the portions in broad teak leaves. Inside those leaves, a rapid biological transformation happens. Microscopic white tendrils wrap around the beans, tightly binding them into a solid block. The biological actor here is a mold genus called Rhizopus. It triggers a fermentation, attacking the complex molecular structures of the soybeans. Through hydrolysis, the mold breaks these compounds down into smaller nutrients, yielding a massive 18.3% protein, far more than other soy products. The biological symbiosis of the mold mirrors the egalitarian cooperation of the Javanese household. It is a highly efficient nutritional marvel built on minimal resources. That extreme efficiency was put to the ultimate test during World War II. When Japanese forces occupied the Pacific, thousands of prisoners of war were forced into brutal, starving conditions. Historical records show that prisoners who were given rations of tempeh managed to survive lethal outbreaks of dysentery and severe malnutrition. Because the Rhizopus fermentation process had already pre-digested the complex proteins and carbohydrates, the weakened prisoners could actually absorb the nutrients their failing bodies desperately needed to stay alive. By the 1960s, Western science finally caught on to what Javanese farmers had known for centuries. Indonesian researchers teamed up with scientists at Cornell University and the USDA. Together, they worked to formally decode the exact microbiological mechanisms behind the fermentation. The research didn't stay in agricultural labs. It found a receptive audience in the 1970s counterculture. American communes in Tennessee, like The Farm, started fermenting it in bulk to feed a growing movement of vegetarians and vegans. Western health movements industrialized an indigenous survival technology, scaling up a process that had already sustained generations in Southeast Asia. Back in modern-day Indonesia, the mental tempeh stigma is entirely dead. Domestic production has scaled up massively. Banana and teak leaves have largely been swapped for plastic wrappers, and tens of thousands of producers are now organized under huge national cooperatives like Kopti. The Indonesian government is actively campaigning to enshrine the food as a UNESCO intangible cultural heritage. This bid is not about protecting the physical soybeans. It is about safeguarding the living, oral knowledge and the communal practices that have been passed down through generations of families. Long before it appeared as a modern dietary trend, the Javanese had perfected a zero-waste, high-protein synergy between human labor and microbial fermentation, creating a model for sustainable nutrition that remains just as relevant today.